I'm interested in that thought, especially, which is about the importance of convening, about the sort of kind of ceremonial practice of being together to watch and absorb a film. And I've read in other interviews you've given, reflecting on how you've often been surprised at some of the screenings you've had where the majority of the audience is Black. And in the past, you would always think that is the preserve of middle class or upper middle class audiences who are white. And I've had similar experiences. And I mean, how is that lost in the sort of transition into the virtual realm? And how do we retain some of that? And what are the ways in which you, as this festival, are thinking of replicating that? And have you been successful?
Okay, for us, I think, first of all, you have these advantages of social media, right? And you've also, one of the advantages we have is that our audience base is really broad. So you have the traditional, audience that is into the art house. Then you have the ones who like popular cinema, and then, as I said, really reaching your audience, your communities. Making sure they have access to the information is important. So in that sense, there is a lot of and then there's this as I said, the social media platforms. So there's a lot of conversation going on amongst varying groups of people around the curated program. So in that sense, I think we are still retaining that, cohesive audience that we have for the in-person experience. And even more so because we're reaching nationally now with the virtual screening, you're reaching the US. And one of the downsides, of course, of the virtual screening is also you have to adhere to this geo-blocking, requirement. And there it breaks your heart because the people whose stories are being told, on the continent necessarily don't have access to it. But on the other hand, you have to respect the intellectual property of the person who has, gifted you with their content. And but in fact, speaking of that, today we got a note from someone in Australia. It just makes you feel so, it really like lifts my spirits. Even though they couldn't see the film, they've been reading the content on social media, coming back to your question, William. And that makes you really, you're reaching, it's far reaching. And this person said we're Afro-Australians. I never knew that term existed, but I love the fact that it's pivoted from maybe Aborigine now might be something like saying Oriental or, might be.
Well, they have there's now a sizable African community, like immigrant communities from like Sudan, Zimbabwe. So there's Kenya, they're large African communities.
Yes. That's
right.
We
don't count South Africans as part of that, but
yeah. I wanted to ask you another question, which is, I think you've experienced also how African film has changed. Like, well, what I mean by like what kind of stories African filmmakers tell, or firstly, what they are often being allowed to tell, what they are trying to tell. Can you say like something about what you've noticed, like how this has changed? And we discussed this with the other panelists, with the other guests. We talked a little bit there about sort of auteur driven cinema, this kind of more socially concerned cinema versus, or these sort of big theme cinema, and now this kind of more personal cinema. Like, what are some of the things that you've seen change? Like, and maybe perhaps also whether the internet, like the availability of the technology, it's more democratic, whether that's had an impact on what people are trying to make, what kind of stories people are trying to tell. And then as the last part of that, what other kinds of stories do you think are still coming?
Well, that's it. I guess they say every generation puts their mark on their own stamp on the story. So I believe, you guys were speaking of the auteurs like Sembens, the Mambettis, the Suleiman Sisseys, and we still program some of those works because if something is well done, a story is well told, it's never dated, And so I think if you are curating a festival, you're also telling a story. So you're weaving together the past into the present, into the future. And I feel, as you know, coming back to your question, it's not that so much the themes have changed, but I think each generation finds a new window, a new angle to tell the story of their moment, right? And so if you say that we're still battling with all the various, challenges that face our community, our world, our gender, human rights, so, and especially with technology now, let's say this new generation has more freedom, in a way, and also they can make their own films without relying on outside support. I guess you can make these fancy iPhones, which we've also shown films made on these fancy iPhones, and it's amazing, short films. And, there's more freedom in a way. And I think then you have our homegrown industry of Nollywood and also South African's industry. So you have these younger filmmakers who are not necessarily looking outside and are working on the continent. And we have quite a few of them in this year's program, and they support each other's work. They're producing each other's work. So I feel that's why I'm saying, really, we're the last frontier. We're a billion people strong. We have to start not looking at the Netflix and the Hulus and whoever, but to start thinking seriously, if you are the filmmaker or you're the producer, start thinking, how do you finesse? How are we going to sort of firewall? Because they're coming at us, really. This is where, yeah.